Hi everyone, thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Harshini. I'm the president of the Global Innovation Challenge at WMGIC. Um, so we've been working on this competition, to set up this competition for a few months now, and we hope you all have an enjoyable experience as you create an innovative and sustainable solution to a global issue. If at any point during the competition you would like anything, please let us know. We have an amazing group of professors and professionals, so let's get started. I'll hand it over to the executive board members to introduce themselves.
I'll start things off. So my name is Shivani Gupta. I'm the external relations director for the Global Innovations Challenge. So to all the judges and mentors who've gotten emails from me, thank you for responding. And so I'm so glad to see so many people in the audience today, and we're just gonna go ahead and introduce ourselves as the executive board.
Hi, I'm Lydia Funk, and I'm the event director. So if you have any questions about logistics, what room you're supposed to be in, or how to find people, come and ask me. I'm Chris, I'm the recruitment director. Hi, I'm Macy Punzalon. I'm the creative director, and I
Hi, I'm Thomas Liu, and I'm the development director.
Okay, and just to let you guys know who else is in the room besides students, I'm just gonna give you guys a list of our judges and mentors today for the competition, some of which are here in the audience and some of which will be joining us tomorrow. And so we have Miss Michelle Shoup, right up front, Professor Robert Ross in the audience as well, Jacqueline Wesley, who will be here tomorrow, Professor Obasanjo here, Miss Carrie McIntosh, she'll be here tomorrow, Mr. Jeffrey Grieco, who's our keynote speaker for today, Professor Tyler Frazier, Elizabeth Sailor-Matiso, and then our mentors for the competition, we have Brianna Catalino is here with us, Dr. Paul Seitz, we have Professor Nasima Mohammed, Miss Heather Chani, we have Miss Chia Ying Lin, we have Samantha Woolley with us, and we also have Molly Ryan is here. Yeah. Thank you so much for participating.
So hi again, my name is Thomas. I'm a freshman here at the college, and I'm the development director for this year. And so before we start, I'd like to introduce and thank all of our sponsors for this event to make WMGIC happen. And so this is the third year of our event. So it actually started as a student idea in 2017. And then so students pitched this idea to formerly IPTR, which is now the Global Research Institute at William & Mary. And then so the Global Research Institute is obviously our principal sponsor to make this event happen the past 2 years, and obviously again this year. But this year, it's really exciting. We have a lot of different new partners on campus and off campus. And so in addition to the GRI this year, the Reef Centers is sponsoring us, and then we have Vice Provost Hansen here with us. And the Entrepreneur Center at the business school, the Innovation and Design Studio is also one of our sponsors, which is also linked to the club, which is Tribe Innovation. And then Tribe Innovation is actually going to have a workshop afterwards, after our opening ceremonies, before the mentoring session starts. So students interested can be part of this Tribe Innovation session to learn more about design thinking, and then they can also help guide the case because they have seen the case beforehand. And we also have the API department, which is the Asian American and Pacific Islander department sponsoring us. And then lastly, we have a individual who's sponsoring us too. So these are all the sponsors that we have for this year. And then so now I would like to introduce Professor Sue Peterson, who is a co-director of the Global Research Institute. And then the Global Research Institute has been core to making WMGIC happen providing us logistics, guiding us throughout the whole year, making sure that this event happens. So without further ado, Professor Sue Peterson.
Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So as Thomas said, I'm co-director with Professor Mike Tierney of the Global Research Institute, which is a multidisciplinary hub that brings together students, faculty, and practitioners doing research on real-world global issues. The Global Research Institute is pleased to support the Global Innovation Challenge, which shares our vision on interdisciplinary collaboration as a source of innovation. I want to tell you just a little bit about the Global Research Institute and about why we support WMGIC. The Global Research Institute, is home to 7 major research projects. It's a place where new knowledge is created. It's a place where faculty, students, and practitioners work together to tackle difficult global problems. Problems like violent conflict in Africa, community health issues in developing countries, the effective evaluation, allocation and evaluation of foreign aid, and traditional and new challenges to national and international security. The Global Research Institute is a place where one person and one idea can have a big impact well beyond the walls of this university. It's a place where student ideas power innovation. In fact, the Global Research Institute traces our origins to a student idea. More than 15 years ago now, a William & Mary student who was doing an undergraduate honors thesis on environmental aid was having a problem finding data that he could use for his research. And so, he cobbled it together throughout the course of the year, but at his thesis defense at the end of the year, he asked his advisors how he could go about collecting the data himself. And he asked them whether they'd like to help him collect that data, and in fact, write a book based on that data and his honors thesis. And they did. And that honors thesis and that defense was the birth of marked the birth of aid data, the first and the largest research project at the Global Research Institute. That student, as some of you may know, of course, was Brad Parks, who is now the executive director of aid data. A project that has now raised more than $45 million in grants and contracts to support its work in making foreign aid more transparent. It all started with a student idea, right? One person, one idea, student-faculty collaboration, eventually student-faculty practitioner collaboration, and real-world impact. That's the story of the Global Research Institute, but it's also very much the story of WMGIC, right? Of the Global Innovation Challenge at William & Mary. As Thomas alluded to, 3 years ago, 2 students at the Global Research Institute approached the leadership, approached ADATA and GRI to create a space for students to challenge traditional methods of international aid and develop innovative and sustainable solutions to development problems. Today, WMGIC, of course, is a student organization created from student ideas. It creates a platform for students from many different disciplinary perspectives to work collaboratively with each other and collaboratively with faculty and practitioners to propose innovative solutions. It's important work, and the Global Research Institute is proud to support it and the Global Innovation Challenge more broadly. So without further ado, on behalf of the Global Research Institute, welcome to the 3rd annual Global Innovation Challenge at William & Mary. I know you'll do important and innovative work this weekend, but I also hope that you'll have lots of fun doing it. So thank you and welcome. Next up is our Vice Provost for International Affairs, Steve Hansen, who also in his capacity as Vice Provost of International Affairs also directs the Reeves Center for International Studies. Steve.
Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Congratulations for taking part in this really important initiative, and I hope you will have a wonderful time. So to echo Sue's thoughts, this is really going to be a lot of fun. What you are doing in this organization is tremendously important. It's fun, but it's also important. That is because it is really clear to us all who work in international relations, in international development, that the problems that the world is facing today are not getting any less pressing, and they're not getting any less complex. We are making some progress in areas. There's reason for optimism, but the timescale by which we have to change things in certain areas, with climate change being an obvious example, but we could point to others, it's pressing on us. And what that means is we need fresh approaches. We need fresh thinking. We need some generational turnover, frankly speaking. And that means that the kinds of leaders who are being produced in this institution and that you are all going to become are going to be absolutely vital. I have no doubt about that in the next couple of decades to century if we look a little further ahead. And William & Mary, of course, has a long tradition in this area. We would like to say that we were global at our founding. 1693, of course, we were an overseas educational experiment of King William and Queen Mary, who had to be convinced, as you know, that Virginia, was a good place to set up a global kind of Enlightenment college. And they did that. We're very grateful for the Royal Charter 326 years ago. All of our professors at the beginning were from overseas. They were from either England or, in one case, from Scotland. And all of our students were learning global curricula right at the beginning. So let's not just laugh about it, right? It's sort of built into our DNA that we are a place that was looking out to the world from the very beginning. And that's the reason that the folks that we all know, and the early alumni we point to, people like George Washington, who did get his surveyor's license here, so we count him. Then he was our first U.S. Chancellor of William & Mary after independence was George Washington. He actually lived in the president's house for a while. Washington, a guy named Thomas Jefferson, we won't belabor that point, but you all know he went here too. Later ambassador to France. James Monroe, fairly well known, particularly to our Latin American colleagues, as an important figure in American foreign policy. We kind of downplay that with some of our friends from Latin America who come up. I once was with the ambassador from Ecuador, and she said, I told her, sorry, but James Monroe was our alum. And she said, well, every family has to have one black sheep in the family, so, you had James Monroe. But nevertheless, it's quite clear that this institution gave rise to a whole group of people who shaped this country's foreign policy and international engagement, and that is because it was an international institution. So I mean that quite seriously. Now, that's not to lose sight of all the really awful things that those people did and the awful parts of the history of William and Mary, which we're also engaging in a very direct way these days. And I think that's all to the good, and it actually relates to our challenges here at this event, because we're going to be looking clear-eyed at the things that don't work about the world order, at the things that don't work about global development or aid or the way that we pursue foreign policy. This country and this institution have to reckon with a lot of complexities, including the complexities of our own history and our own elites that we produced in the past. So you'll be a different kind of elite, an elite that is more inclusive as well as being thoroughly global. Now, why do we think we can give you the tools to solve the world's problems effectively? It is because at William & Mary we're doing pretty well in making the globe present here in Williamsburg and putting Williamsburg into the globe. As I think you all know, because it's our favorite talking point at the Reeves Center, we are the #1 public research university in the country for study abroad participation rates. 60%, almost, we're at 58.2% of William & Mary undergrads do study abroad before they graduate, and we're shooting for that 60% strategic target, and we know we're going to make it. We have about 1,000 international student scholars and their families that we serve in the Reeves Center in terms of the visa immigration and support. And they come from almost 70 countries around the world, so it's a really robust population who come here and enrich our community with their perspectives, with their backgrounds, with their different ideas for solutions for global problems. And I would be more than remiss if I didn't mention that the Global Research Institute is a partnership between the Reeve Center and Arts and Sciences, and we are so amazed to see the work that Mike and Sue and all the colleagues are doing in making this research opportunity, these sets of innovative student proposals come to life, turn into multi-million-dollar research grants for real, bring in faculty from across the university, from across the disciplines. That is an engine of change, and I might add, helped us fulfill yet another strategic planning goal, which was to have a signature research initiative at William & Mary on every continent of the world. We knew we had Antarctica because Virginia Institute of Marine Science goes down there every year, and now we've got all the continents, and William & Mary people are, really everywhere now. It's terrific to see. I'm going to conclude with a personal reflection, though, about, if I can give you one little piece of advice in solving global problems. It's a little bit not humble, but I'm a specialist on Russia, so I was actually a Soviet specialist when I was trained, sorry to say, getting older. And I got my PhD in '91, so I like to say I was the very last Soviet specialist ever trained because there was no Soviet Union after that. I spent a lot of time in the 1990s going to post-communist Russia, talking to my friends there and learning a lot about how Russians saw U.S. development efforts at that time. Russia, of course, was a top priority at that point for the U.S. We thought that we could help somehow with the transition to democracy and markets. We thought we could help them with efficiency. And I'll tell you a story that illustrates the problem I'm going to point to. And that is that you need not only the analytical tools, the econometrics, the GIS, the geospatial, all of those things you totally need these days. But you also need enough empathy and understanding of local context that when you bring those solutions to real people, they hear you as trying to help, and they believe you're really doing it. So my story relates to the problem of natural gas use in Russia, which everybody from the US who flew over after the communist system collapsed said, oh my goodness, it's the most inefficient possible mess, right? You've got giant central heating systems in these huge kind of high-rise houses that the Soviets built everywhere, and there was no meter on anybody's apartment. So they basically just blasted natural gas in Siberia day and night, regardless of what the temperature was. No one could turn it. It was really hot in some of these places. They would open the windows in the middle of the winter, I kid you not, to get some cool air from this horrible heat. So you can imagine the economist, comes over and says, this country is wasting so much. They're wasting this gas. They could be exporting it. They could be making money. And so they'd say, what we need to do is have individual meters, right? Pretty obvious we should do that. Except these were also the homes of a lot of elderly people, a lot of folks who had almost no money at all, and who'd spent their entire adult life being subsidized by the Soviet system to have free heat in the winter. And in Russia, heat in the winter is quite important, as you can imagine. So what came through the translation process, and I was in the room and I heard these kinds of things happen as people were translating into Russian, is, okay, folks, we're here from the United States. We're going to help you develop Russia, and we're going to do that by making sure each of you pay individually for the natural gas you're going to get in the middle of the winter. And of course, that turned into a game of telephone where people were telling each other, the US has come here to turn off the heat in the middle of the winter. So I'd go back to my friends in the economic world, and I'd say, you don't understand what you're saying. I was in my 20s at the time, so I didn't have a whole lot of influence. Now I have tons. But I would tell them, this isn't working very well. You're going to get a bad reputation because I know you mean well, and it's a terrible waste. It really is. But, there's something wrong in the translation. And it didn't work very well. People weren't hearing that message. I think we paid a price in our relationship with Russia over time. I think that a whole generation of people grew up thinking that the US actually had a kind of master plan to dismantle what made their system work, as opposed to a plan to work with them to find ways to get out of the mess left behind by the Soviet Union. So it's a bit of a long-winded story. I hope it's helpful to you. What I mean to say is that you can be even better than just the best analysts, the best users of the technologies we're providing. You can be the folks who've been in those countries, who understand the languages, the history, the culture, the context, and have enough empathy to accept that you're going to be learning lessons from the people you work with, not only teaching. And when you get that kind of reciprocity flow and you're really working with intelligent people across those divides, that's when global solutions not only happen, but are sustainable. So thank you very much for your attention.
I want to thank Vice Provost Hansen and Professor Peterson for their remarks. And so now I'm up here to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Jeffrey Grieco. And so I actually met Mr. Grieco at my high school. So we had a career fair at my high school. And then so he was one of the persons who represented the international affairs and IRN, which is what I was interested in. So about a month ago, when we were thinking about who we should invite for our keynote speaker, I immediately reminded myself of Mr. Grieco, and then so just reached out to him, and he was really nice enough to come down to Williamsburg today and tomorrow to be one of our judges, and most importantly, our keynote speaker. And Mr. Grieco is actually missing her daughter's soccer game to be with us, so that's even more important. And so I just wanted, yeah, against our rival school, which is important. I wish I was there myself, but. But yeah, so without further ado, Mr. Grieco.
Beautiful. Greetings, everyone. How are you? Okay, just right, left click or right click? Oh, okay, well, great. All right. So thank you for having me here today. My first time to William and Mary. I am a Virginian. I've got a lot of kids. And anybody from Langley High School in Northern Virginia? There we go. We got 3 so far. All right, great. And I'm very interested in trying to spend some time with you guys outside of our talk tonight and getting to know you a little better and talking to you about your career strategies and your career plans. So what I thought I'd do tonight is basically kind of walk you through my interpretation of where we are. I spend about 90% of my time on development and on conflict states. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, a lot of time in really bad places, frankly. And so I've got some pretty strong feelings about what we're doing really well in development and some things that we're not doing well that we need your help on. And I want to talk about innovation in the development space that's happened so that you know the United States and other countries are really leaders in innovating in the development space, so it's a very welcoming space for innovation. So first things first, and then I'm going to end the PowerPoint, and I'll make sure that all you guys get access to the PowerPoint. At the end of the PowerPoint is a career planning, basically training that I do for international affairs schools so that I can lay out for you ideas, to put some ideas in your head about what your careers might be or might be interested in being, and ways that you should maybe look at careers in these different organizations. So that's at the tail end of the presentation. So I'm going to move fairly quickly. I first want to plug, I'm the Deputy Chair of Society for International Development. I've been on the board there about 7.5 years. It is the largest trade association in the world for everybody that does development and foreign assistance implementation for their countries. So it's not just America. There's a SID in London, there's a SID in Kenya, there's a SID in Italy. They're around the world. The Washington chapter is the largest in the world, and we hold the largest international development conference each year, which will be May 30th this year at the Reagan Building. We have over 850 people there. Exhibitors, attendees, students are allowed to come to that as well and participate in it. I encourage you to look on the website for SID. We have a student membership, and it gets you a whole bunch of things that as a student starting to think about their career, their internships, jobs, what kind of programs would I maybe want to study. The website and our student membership program is there to help you, and we have, I think, half the staff in our Washington office are interns from colleges. So you could apply to be an intern at SID, but SID also posts on their website internships for all the development implementers that are in Washington or the Washington metro area that you can access. So I encourage you to go check it out. Okay, enough of the shameless plug. Okay, so this week, just by chance, didn't know that it was coming out, my friend George Ingram at the Brookings Institution published with Kristen Lord, who's a conflict state expert, and she runs IREX, one of the implementing groups, democracy kind of promotion groups. They came out with this new report called Global Development Disrupted. So what they did, and I thought this would be a good scene setter for you about current state of thinking and development among really big organizations, not just in Washington. They interviewed people all over the development space, 93 different development leaders. So some of these things, when you read them, sound pretty shocking, but they're really not when you understand what's going on right now globally. And if I was in your shoes, I would feel very good that there's a lot of potential for help that you could bring to bringing us solutions that we, as leaders in the development community, never would have thought of. and that you guys now, through your education here at William & Mary and through the training and these aid data programs and stuff, you have unbelievable resources at your fingertips to help design. So I'm not going to go through all these, but a couple that jump out. So poverty reduction, which is traditionally, for the last 50 years, traditionally been the way that the development community came together around a major goal. Poverty reduction is no longer a unifying theme among donors. This could be government donors, multilateral donors, bilateral donors are the government donors. Multilateral donors are the big institutional donors like the UN and other organizations. IFIs, everybody know what they are, the International Financial Institutions, IFC, World Bank, MEGA, and those guys. So we're having a little bit of a problem right now because we're not together as a community like we used to be focused on that, but we're also, as you're going to see in a minute, making great progress on it. Secondly, they talked about the bifurcation between the countries that are really trapped in conflict now, fragile and failed states, and those who are escaping it to become real middle-class, growing middle-class societies, still lower income, but middle-class societies that are developing the middle class that should be able to sustain their growth over a longer period of time. New actors are proliferating. We know now that the non-governmental, what we call ODA, official development assistance, the non-ODA funds now are surpassing official government assistance around the world. So corporate contributions, foundation contributions, remittances, all of those now exceed what the governments are able to give each year. And so what's that causing? It's causing a little bit of a shift in a change in who has the power to make decisions on the ground in host countries. And that's having an effect that's really serious because the host country governments don't want to lose control over what their development priorities are, but at the same time, they want to be able to encourage that funding to come in and help them to do programming at the community level. So it's a big, big problem. Just the last one, I think. Inclusion, inequality, human rights, all traditional conversational points that bring people together in this context of where are we going. This year in these 93 interviews, George found very few people reference that anymore. And they're more focused on individual conflicts that are creating bigger problems for us globally. I always do the wrong way. So if you don't know it, there's a huge amount of innovation that's already happened in the development space globally. A lot of it here from the United States, and I have to admit, I'm an American. I'm a little more biased. I put up a lot of our innovations on here, but you should know these. If you're thinking about international development, you should understand that as a nation, our humanitarian, our charitable instincts have had serious and very positive impacts around the world. Up at the top, the Marshall Plan. That was an innovation. You guys remember, if you've studied your history, what got us into World War II was the problem we didn't help our enemies to rebuild their economies after World War I. And it created the seeds that led to World War II. So we innovated, our leaders innovated, and they said, listen, we're going to help Germany and some of these other societies, Japan, to rebuild their countries and their industries. But we're going to do it so that they're prohibited from having military-type means. Those programs helped to build the OECD in Europe and other programs that continue on to this day. The Green Revolution. Everybody know what the Green Revolution is? Okay, you studied it. So Norman Borlaug, who's one of the greatest American pioneers in forging the Green Revolution, made huge changes to India so that they can feed themselves now. The Bangladeshis have used it. He brought it to Africa. He set up institutes that live on, even though Norman is now passed on. And he still runs, there's still a Borlaug Institute in Iowa, bringing Somali farmers over to get trained on how to use more improved seed varieties. So that these legacies and these innovations continue on. I won't talk too much about vaccinations, but you know those stats. You know about PEPFAR. That program is continuing on today. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, this was another innovation. How are we going to do performance-based development? Well, the U.S. Congress, working in a bipartisan fashion with the Bush administration, decided to put $5 billion a year in grant money in exchange for developing countries hitting performance targets on certain key areas. They did it very successfully, and MCC now maintains funding, not at the same levels as when it started, but it maintains funding levels that offer it a unique way to do different types of large-scale infrastructure projects in their countries. Okay, so where is development doing well right now? So right now, when you look at extreme poverty, for me, that's the major, if you're looking at, we could have a whole bunch of different indicators for what is development success and so forth, but let's just use extreme poverty. That's people making less than $1.90 a day. These stats are directly out of the World Bank and the OECD reports. We have made unbelievable progress in the last 20 years to almost eliminate extreme poverty around the world. Some of it is because of assistance programs from bilateral donors like the United States. Some of it is because of UN and multilateral aid programs. Some of it is because the host countries are making really good decisions now, and they're applying lessons learned in other developing countries to improve their economic growth rates and to improve their ability to fund their own development longer term. Just a couple, I'm sure India jumps out at you. 42% in 1997 of the population in India was living in extreme poverty. 20 years later, it's down to 12%. And I guarantee you, that's 2 years ago now. The stats will show it's even lower. China, the biggest unbelievable improvements in extreme poverty, from 42% in 97 to 0.7% in 17. That's 250, how many million people is it? 500 million people that are no longer in extreme poverty, that they're now feeding themselves over time. The one outlier in all the regions is the Middle East. And you guys know why, primarily because of all the conflicts that are going on right now. Syria, northern Iraq, Yemen, other places, Libya. So they actually went down. And so there are areas that still need a lot of work and a lot of help. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So what is it? What kinds of things are we doing well? Well, we've lowered extreme poverty rates because the OECD actually shows you that in 2017, our ODA lending to least developed countries actually increased 4%. So we're actually giving more money to the countries that are having the biggest amount of problems on their own development paradigm. In Africa, the funding rose by 3% to $29 billion. Humanitarian aid rose by 6.1% in real terms to these countries, these least developed countries that are in extreme poverty. And that's good and bad. You know, it's good because we're spending more money on the humanitarian side to keep people alive, but the reasons why there's a growth in that number is the bad part, and we're going to talk about that in a few seconds. We've provided a sustainable revenue stream. So there's been a consistent amount of funding over time, over the last 20 years, to the countries in the developing world. So we have provided more than $100 billion. Last year in 2017, the actual amount was $146 billion. But ODA has remained above $100 billion to all these countries for more than 20 years now. And that's a sizable amount of money that they can depend on each year for sustained development programming. Small scale, I want to just talk about this. You guys know what transition assistance is? Are you familiar with that? You know what OTI is? Office of Transition Assistance at USAID. So this is a special, new, innovative program that's been around for about 15 years now, trying to develop tools and skill sets that will go into a conflict state that's just emerging from conflict or emerging from fragility and is now needing to get specific assistance going forward that helps them to leapfrog stability, and so that they can get more economic growth going and get more education and social welfare programs built for their communities. The problem with it is it's small scale. We haven't figured out yet how to do a larger scale on it. I wanted to plug your William & Mary's Aid Data Research Lab, who I meet with frequently at Sid, Washington. They've helped us, but all the donors have really focused on improving their accountability and their aid effectiveness measuring. So how are we doing better? Part of it is our policy as a development community globally. Do you guys know what the Paris Declaration principles are? Okay, so these are principles that we agreed to back in early 2000s as a community of both the developed countries, what we call the DAC, the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD, and the developing countries. They met in a global summit at the UN, and they decided to commit themselves to 5 major principles that would guide not only the resource decisions, but the kinds of programming decisions that will go forward with the donor community helping the developing countries. I won't go through them all, but ownership, giving the host country ownership is critically important. Aligning the country's programs and policies of the donor community with what the host country wants and what they feel they can do in the time frame that they're trying to do it. Harmonization, trying to get the donors to stop redundancy of funding. So I've been in countries where DFID is running the exact same kind of program by a different name that USAID is running in that country. And the host government didn't know it because they were in 2 different ministries, the programs. So those things happen, so increasing harmonization, measuring results, and providing more mutual accountability has really helped us, I think, in the last 20 years to increase our functionality. Now the challenges. So I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, so for me, conflict states right now for our country is probably one of our #1 issues that we are not dealing with effectively. And we need to do better at it, and I'll talk more about that. Now, in Afghanistan's case, if the peace agreement is negotiated and we are successful in getting a peace agreement, that can change the whole paradigm in Afghanistan fairly quickly. But right now, it's a country in a mess, and the capacity of the government to deal with their own management and to secure their inside their borders and to fight terrorism is very weak. There's a ton of failed states right now, Syria, Yemen, Libya, that are really not functioning. And what's our game plan for that longer term? Are we going to go in and help the Syrians, either whether it's Assad's government, or if the country is divided, if there's a new group coming in to run part of the country, are we going to support its reconstruction? Big issues. Should the donor community be concerned about it longer term? Fragile states. If you've been to Pakistan, you know that Pakistan's government only controls a small portion of its country. There's huge unruled, ungoverned areas that are run by tribal systems and cultural issues that are going on in the country, including terrorism. Somalia, Nigeria, Niger, Myanmar, all of them are fragile states that need extra help and extra assistance, but they need new innovative ideas on how to do it, because what we're doing right now is not working, frankly. Ungoverned regions, the Fatah region in Pakistan, it's got mostly Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups blended in to networks of traditional Pakistani tribes. And in the Sinai, ISIL basically is controlling large pieces of the Sinai, and the Egyptian government has decided to just wall it off and stop them from attacking tourist buses in other parts of the Sinai. So they've basically shut it down. Northern Nigeria, Boko Haram, kidnapping 200 women out of a school, that's a huge operation, and to remain at bay without anybody being able to know where they are, that's a huge issue. Somalia, Al-Shabaab, we are continuing. We, the United States and the global community, continue to have major problems. We're trying to stand up a new government in Somalia and trying to help them to build some institutions and social and education programs, but what we're doing is not working. Now, what is it that we're doing that's not working? My #1 issue is we have not figured out how to scale quickly programs that work. What we do, because of a huge amount of regulations that are put on us as donors from our Congress and our parliaments around the world, and the reporting responsibilities maybe that the host country have, we're unable to quickly go in and scale what works and to descale what doesn't work. Defunding a program if it's not making any progress. On the terrorism side, you're going to have Nadia Shadlow, who I know very well. Nadia is going to be here, I think, this week. She was, I think, at RAND for a long time. She's an expert in this counterterrorism struggle. You should definitely go and listen to her. But terrorism and dealing with it at the root level continues to be a major problem globally. And we need fresh, new thinking, and you guys can bring that as part of your work longer term. Forced migration, the transnational refugee flows. We're spending more money now, more resources from the whole donor community on these short-term responses for refugee support, IDP support, forced migration support, and the humanitarian assistance to keep them fed and alive for a period of time until we get a determination on whether they're going to stay where they are or whether they're going to move back. In Afghanistan's case, I can tell you, they just put millions of Afghans on airplanes and sent them back to Afghanistan with no homes. They had already migrated out when the troops were going to be pulled out in 2016. Now we forced them back as a donor community, and the Pakistanis decided that was a great time for them to force all the Afghans in their camps out back to Afghanistan at the same time. So we have millions of people show up in Afghanistan, no infrastructure to support them, no jobs, no camps were even built. So they urged them to go into communities to try to figure it out until they had time to figure out the mess. It's a mess. We need to figure out new solutions, new approaches, new ideas, and you guys can help us to do that. One of my big pet peeves is the diplomatic engagement issue. When you talk to our embassies now, especially in conflict states, they can't go outside their embassy wall. They're prohibited. The regional security officer that runs the embassy security won't let them go out if there's any possible risk at all. So what happens when the diplomats have to say, we can't come see you, but can you come see us? Well, there's some groups that don't want to be seen going into the U.S. Embassy. For security reasons, if it's women, it might be something that could really be harmful to them. So we have to be able to solve, how do we stay diplomatically engaged in conflict states, fragile states, failed states, so that we can offer peace and solutions to peace or programs that can lead to peace and get outside the wall in a secure way to be able to deal with it. Because it's not happening now. I mean, it's just globally, they are shut down. And nobody's more frustrated than the Foreign Service officers who dedicated and joined the State Department or the Foreign Ministry of Great Britain to go and work on these key issues and to not be able to do their job. It really ties their hands behind their back. So what can you guys do on the innovation side? So my recommendation is we need you, and I'm saying we, the development community, globally, we need you to focus on the big issues that cost millions of lives every year, that are destroying nations and destroying communities, because when you destroy a community, you basically fragment the nation itself. And lastly, things that are going to affect negatively our own national security interests, longer term, short or longer term, frankly. Here's some ideas. I'll just throw some ideas. We need different counterterrorism strategies and tools. The stuff we're using right now is not working. And we have to be aggressive in the application of what we recommend, and we're not doing it. I think there's a feeling in Congress that they're willing to resource some of these new ideas, but they just don't have enough strategy, enough people really coming in with unique ways to go after this stuff. And it doesn't have to be people in the Pentagon or in the CIA or in the NSA that are the ones offering the ideas. They have good ideas too, but there needs to be a whole new set of ideas from the civilian side that offers on how are we going to solve these longer term and to make the commitments to do it. Pandemics, the spread of infectious disease. You saw the paper today, Ebola. We have 1,000 new infections on Ebola now. DRC is a mess. It's spreading. WHO lost control and basically threw up its hands now and said, we're going to need a much bigger effort from the global community. We can't handle it. That's really bad. I got to tell you, especially with an infectious disease like Ebola or the Zika or something else that's coming next. So there is an expectation that the next pandemic is really very close. And you can read a bunch of books on this that have been written by really top experts in the field. They know it's coming. It's not a question of if we're going to have a pandemic. It's a question of when it's going to hit us. And when I say us, it's going to hit the United States because everything is globalized now. The pipes, they're airplanes. Person gets on an airplane, that disease is now in our country. If they get on a train and they cross borders, they're now in a different space, and that disease is now in that space. So we have to have much more strategic thinking about what we're going to do to prepare ourselves as a country and as a community, global community, to try to work on that. And there's a bunch of great institutions that are working on that right now. We talked about the diplomatic engagement, increasing the share of private sector. One of the things that we've learned, the countries that are doing the best have had an increased share of private sector-led growth as a percentage of their GDP. The countries that are doing worse are countries where the government portion of the economy has grown and the private sector piece has shrunk. So focusing on the private, you look at China, it's the same thing. Yeah, they have a huge government infrastructure. I come up against China in Afghanistan, but it's private Chinese companies with some state companies coming in as well. Now, let's talk about careers. now that I've thoroughly depressed you. So, obviously, you go back one. So why would you pick a career in international affairs? And it doesn't matter what your interdisciplinary field is. If it's health, if it's biology, if it's government, if it's cultural affairs, all of you can have a role in doing that inside a career in international affairs. Absolutely. So first of all, it's fun. It's great to go to cool places. Sometimes for me, it's not cool places, but that's okay. It's interesting, and you're trying to help solve problems, and it makes you feel very fulfilled every day. The things you're doing are going to have an impact on saving people's lives or improving their lives longer term. It's interesting. It's fulfilling. I think just hearing your vice provo today, you guys don't need any education on why that's important. So I'm going to just walk you through very quickly. Job opportunities for you in the government sector, job opportunities for you in the for-profit sector, job opportunities in the nonprofit sector, and then faith-based organizations, because many people are very active in their faith groups overseas as well. So first, in the federal government, 27 different federal agencies have international affairs offices and programs either here, dealing with international affairs, or overseas. All of them hire people, young people like you, out of school to work and to develop and to grow within their organizations. I've listed several of them here. CDC, Center for Disease Control, TDA, TDA is the Trade Development Agency, which does private sector growth for small and medium-sized enterprise. Congress has both authorizing and appropriating functional responsibilities, and who runs the appropriations process and the authorizing process in the Congress? Young people like you, fresh out of college, that are working in there and get trained and stay in those professional committee positions for 20, 30 years. Paul Grove, a friend of mine, who's the Appropriations Committee Chief of Staff for the Senate Appropriations Committee, Paul's been on that committee for 22 years, but he started right out of college. So there is ways to make yourself feel very engaged in the international affairs, but still remain inside your actual interest areas. On the private sector side, U.S. companies that trade overseas always hire young people to come in and help them to strategize. Maybe it's doing analytic work, econometric stuff. There are U.S. companies that have plants and offices overseas. I just met in Dubai with Ford, who runs their Middle East operation out of Dubai, and they're hiring young people into both their regional offices and their country offices because they're expanding their operations in the region. Multinational corporations, AT&T, Chevron, others hire directly young people out of school to work on their international affairs activities. I'm going to move a little more quickly. Nonprofit sector, a lot of the NGO community that's focused on good governance, democracy building, health, social welfare programs, they hire only young people because the jobs don't pay great, and it's great for young people. I hate to say it, they're not going to hire a 50-year-old guy to come in and work because I can't afford to work for that amount of money. But they love the fact that you're young, you come in with your education, they can train you, send you overseas to work perhaps on their programs and educate you, and then you rise into the management of the NGO. Happens all the time, very actively. Refugee groups, advancing human rights organizations. I think Paul is here, and he's working on human rights stuff I saw in his bio. Environmental and climate stuff, all of that, very well funded now in DC for organizations and overseas. Faith-based communities. You know, we give more from the United States in charitable contributions from our faith community than any nation in the world by a factor several times over. So our faith communities, World Vision, Lutheran Relief, Islamic Relief, a host of them. I put some of their logos at the bottom there so you could see it. CRS, World Jewish Relief. They actually don't only fund programs because they're raising money in their faith organizations here, but then they program the money in the developing countries and they hire young people to go and program it with them in their host countries. So you could rise and go into a faith program that it may be at their headquarters first and then go into Kenya and spend a year on an active program with your degree. So I'm going to quickly move through State Department. 3 ways to get in. You can become a Foreign Service Officer, take the test. State makes you take a test. You can become a civil service employee. No test, but you got to have a good fit to the job that they put out on their posting on the schedule. Lastly, you can become a contractor working for them, which hundreds and thousands of young people do. They work for a contractor who is working for the State Department in the implementation of our programs and our embassy programs overseas. USAID. USAID, you can become a Foreign Service officer, but they don't give a test. They give something worse. They make you sit down and have a conversation with 5 senior Foreign Service officers who get to ask you like 30 questions, but they're trying to figure out what's your niche, what's your specialty. Where state hires for expertise, expertise, and then they make you a generalist over time. Aid hires you as a specialist, and they try to, over time, build you into a manager as you rise up and you become a mission director running a whole mission overseas in Egypt or in Tunisia or some other place. You can also become a contractor, and they also have civil service employees that they hire all the time, and those jobs are all posted, and you can find those. Faith groups are hiring all the time. Peace Corps, a lot of the faith organizations and a lot of USAID employees are former Peace Corps people that have served overseas. They love to hire people with overseas experience. Even a year overseas makes a huge difference on your resume and the possibility of getting a job there. That's it. I wanted to just say thank you, guys. I'm here for you. International affairs is my passion. We need a new generation of leaders, people that care about the future of our country, because international engagement is what our country is all about. It's not about pulling back inside a shell. It's about going out and helping to solve crises around the world that we've done for decades. And I want to try to help you to figure that out if that's an area that you're interested in. Thank you very much. And Sid, by the way, does the largest career fair in the world on development. It happens every year in January at George Washington University in the Marvin Center, and students flood it. We get a ton of students coming in. It's very inexpensive. I forgot the cost. It's like $10 if you're a student. But you get to meet real recruiters right at the table who are hiring right now for jobs here and overseas. And you can walk up with your resume and maybe get a job out of it.
I want to thank Mr. Grieco so much for the keynote speech, and then he really talked about all the types of jobs and then different paths that international affairs can bring, and we're really delighted that we have a lot of these people reflected in our judges and mentors today. So one of our judges, who's Carrie McIntosh, who's going to be here later tonight and tomorrow as a judge, she is actually a Foreign Service officer, and we also have people from the Coast Guard and all different sectors that deal with international and foreign development, and so we're really glad to have them here again. And then now I'd like to introduce Macy, who is our creative director, who wrote our case this year, and then so she'll talk some about the case, and then after the opening ceremony ends, we'll be pressing send, and then you guys will have a digital copy of the case. So Macy.
The Republic of Kiribati is home to over 120,000 people living across 21 of 33 atolls, each no higher than 2 meters above the ocean. The people of Kiribati have been growing anxious as the consequences of climate change knock the ocean's waves at their doors. Over the past few years, they have been braving up against cyclones, king tides, droughts, and floods. These extreme weather events have brought about increasing disease incidents, damage to their islands, and food insecurity. In wake of all the calamities that they have faced, they have remained united and strong. Kiribati's leaders work tirelessly at the forefront to address issues relating to climate change in a global setting, all while formulating plans to aid the nation in their current and projected trials. Former President Anote Tong had advocated for climate change advancements with Pope Francis, former President Obama, and at various climate change conferences like the United Nations Climate Change Conference in 2015. There is great fear that the people of Kiribati will soon become the world's first climate refugees. They worry that they will lose their nation, their culture, and their identities should this ever come to fruition. Claire Anatera, a co-coordinator of Kirikan, the Kiribati Climate Action Network, said, "I feel hopeless in one way that our people are suffering, but I also have the hope within our people that they will try to find a way to adapt. As you are constructing solutions to these challenges, I hope you keep in mind the importance of implementing something which the people will find acceptable. It is important to find a common ground, that your solutions align with their goals and their values to ensure that their dignity is being upheld." President Tong stated, Our focus must be on adaptation because adaptation has got to be the way forward for us. Because if we cannot adapt to what is happening, we will have no choice but to relocate.
Thanks so much, Macy. Okay, hello again. I'm Lydia. As a reminder, I'm the event director. That is the conclusion of our opening ceremony. So in just a couple minutes, we're going to release the case for you guys online. Shivani's going to send that. The case is going to include instructions and judging criteria and then information about Kiribati and the 3 different streams that you can choose to solve. You're going to be choosing one stream and solving it within the context of the stream that, you're going to be choosing one topic and solving it within the stream that you have chosen. We're going to hold the judges here to talk with Thomas and Harshini, who will be returning shortly, about judging criteria and how that process is going to work tomorrow. And we're also going to be holding mentors on this side of the room so that Remy can return shortly with schedules so that mentors can figure out which classrooms they are going to be meeting with their teams. Teams are going to get to meet with 2 different mentors this evening between 8 and 11. Your mentors will come and find you, and you get to meet with the same mentors again tomorrow morning. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? Okay. Everybody should have been assigned to a classroom. If you don't know what classroom you're in, come and find me. I will let you know. Everybody should also have a name tag, and your team should at some point have been given a whiteboard marker. If you're missing any materials, come and find anybody on the staff, and we can connect you with that stuff. Thank you so much.